Welcome to the IOTA Cybersecurity Experts Panel, an informative, interactive channel discussion covering the latest trends in data protection. I'm your host, Brian Sherman, and today I'll be joined by three industry experts who are willing and able to share insight and advice on the channel security perspective. My guests today include Scott Barlow, VP of Global MSP at Sophos, Mark Glowacz, Director of Service for MailProtector, and Zak Karsan, CEO at Vault America. Good day, gentlemen.
Good day, Brian.
Good day.
Well, it looks like we're off for a great discussion. But first off, I'd like to welcome you to the IOTA Cybersecurity Experts Panel, and thank you for sharing your time and some of the lessons you've learned over the years. And you collectively bring, I believe, decades of channel experience to the conversation. So I'm looking forward to a lively session amongst all of you. So I'd like to kick things off by talking about one of the topics that's come up frequently in some of the discussions we've had recently, which is the fear in cybersecurity education, determining the best approach for selling cybersecurity. And this is a struggle I know for many people in the channel, not just MSPs and MSSPs, but also for vendors and even some of the consultants that work with the SMB audience to try to educate them on why they need to be concerned about the risks and also especially some of the latest trends of cyber threats. So in particular, our IOTA Security Roadshow panel session in Austin, Texas got into a lively conversation on the challenges of selling cybersecurity to the SMB. The experts suggested there's a fine line between fear and education, finding that balance, balancing tales of extremely damaging business failures with the lessons in prevention, which direction to go. So why don't I start off with Scott. Scott, how can MSP strike that healthy balance, communicating the relevant news related to data breaches, ransomware, and other cyber crimes without alienating their prospects?
Yeah, Brian, and first off, thank you for having me. I'm very pleased and honored to be part of this panel. We've done a lot of work and had a lot of conversations around, data breaches that are out there, ransomware, and et cetera. And honestly, I think a lot of the SMBs will suffer breach fatigue, to be honest with you. I mean, if you look at the last week or so, you had a lot of companies that are out there that just announced the breach again, right? And Panera Bread today or yesterday, Saks Fifth Ave was another one, Under Armour with their MyFitnessPal app. Boeing even got struck by ransomware. So there's a lot of examples out there, but then you have to face that mentality from an SMB that is, it won't happen to me. And so when we're looking at it and trying to sell against fear or, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, I think the better way to go about looking at this is, what is the customer's buying habit? What drives them to purchase products? And are they driven by fear or are they driven by, gain, right? Is it pain or gain? And if it's pain, nothing that anybody will do will force them to purchase a product unless they experience the pain internally. And there's some things that MSPs can do by looking at some other examples of SMB breaches that are out there that maybe are in the same vertical as that SMB. But if they're looking at gain and they want to really protect themselves, and we typically see that in the more compliant verticals like financial services and healthcare, then it's an easy conversation. But it's the conversation where somebody has to have that pain in order to take an action is the more difficult scenario. And, with all of the news out there around breaches, it's pretty easy conversation to have these days. And it's just a matter of getting them to allocate the budget that is required to put products and services in place in order to protect against, data breaches and other malware attacks.
Excellent insight. Mark, why don't we go to you? What are your thoughts on the fear and education part of cybersecurity?
Sure. Thank you for having me as well. And I do agree with that comment earlier that you made about it being a fine line. SMBs, and Scott made a great point saying that they feel like it's not going to happen to them because I'm a small business. Why would anybody attack me? And unfortunately, that has changed a lot in the last couple of years. And SMBs are the target because they have been so relaxed, so to speak, with some of the security measures that we as MSPs need to really push in their direction to make them aware and educate them. So when you're having that conversation and you're talking about that pain or gain, what I used to do is a lot of times trying to find out what keeps them up at night. You know, what's going to drive that decision to spend money. And a lot of times what I found was it was almost an emotional response, not a logical response. So if they're staying up at night because my business might be or my data of my business might be hijacked, and somebody's going to want, you know, Bitcoins or thousands of dollars to give me my data back because I haven't taken the measures to protect my data, that's going to be a problem. That's going to drive that small business client to say, okay, I don't want to be in that position. You have painted a picture for me that is keeping me up at night, but I haven't been able to articulate it myself. So what are those next steps? That's where I think that fine balance of fear and education really come into play is, you know, here's how it can really affect you and your business. Here are the ways to deal with it.
Very good. And Zak, do you think, we're referring to the balance quite a bit. What are you seeing out there as far as, you know, the fear versus education part from your partners?
I think it's, you know, taking the subtle approach, right? It's not education through fear, it's fear through education. You know, what I'm seeing is a lot of partners have experienced issues, right, themselves or really with their customers, right? They might serve 100 clients, and a few of those clients, a high percentage, more and more every day, have basically had to deal with data loss or attacks or ransomware. So those MSPs, those partners, need to share those experiences, those real life experiences that are happening with their partners and their MSPs, their customers, the end customer. So ultimately, if you can actually communicate real life stories, right, that are relevant in the SMB space, not just with the bigger guys, communicate those types of experiences and how those MSPs have actually been able to help secure customers, right? And with certain tools and things like that. And on the flip side, the MSPs that have had to go in and actually put in solutions because that end customer basically got attacked and wasn't prepared. So I think just educating and communicating stories and real life experiences will hopefully impact and allow that SMB customer ultimately to hopefully connect and do the things that need to be done to combat ransomware and phishing attacks and that sort of thing.
And you mentioned, I think all three of you have mentioned that in the SMB space, a lot of people don't believe that it's going to happen to their business. They're not going to get hacked. They're not going to get ransomware. They're too small of a fish to really be a target for cybercrime, which we know is not the reality anymore. So, Mark, going back to it, is you've been on the MSP side as well as being on the vendor side. Is there such a thing as going too light on the danger factor when it comes to cybersecurity?
Possibly. I think it's going to depend on the client and maybe even the industry that they're in. If they're a financial organization, if they're a healthcare organization, I don't think you can go too far with the fear because there are very serious ramifications for a breach in those industries. Some other clients, maybe not so much. You know, it is going to be a judgment call, I guess. And if you have a client who's, you know, a good example is I had an attorney when I was still an MSP. It was a sole proprietor attorney. She was hit with ransomware. And I had to walk her through the process, literally going to the bank with her because she was so afraid of the steps that it took to get her data back, and she didn't have the right protection. That's a story that I then used with my other SMB clients to say, look, this is a sole proprietor attorney who had her data hacked and ransom put on it. And this can happen to anybody. So yeah, I think it's a judgment call is what it comes down to.
Gotcha. And Scott, going back to, you talked a lot about vertical markets too. Is it easier to convey those type of stories when it's within a similar market from an MSP to their clients?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Everybody, it's all, you know, the value of the data. You know, if you can live without your data, I think that's, you know, then you're not going to really care too much. But there are industries out there that regulate or require, with compliance regulations, the need to implement, you know, tools as a best measure. I mean, you're talking financial services, healthcare, insurance. This, you know, especially now with the GDPR in the UK, it's impacting North American customers as well. So it's a scenario where, you know, you have to look at the security posture of your organization more holistically and ensure that, you know, yes, my disk is encrypted. I have mobile security. I'm protecting, you know, web and email at the gateway. I'm, you know, implementing endpoint, not just endpoint, not just the basic AV checkbox that a lot of MSPs have out there, but I think, you know, what's the next gen? How do you prevent against exploits? You know, so it goes pretty deep as opposed to just checking the checkbox with antivirus these days. And I think, you know, that's important. A lot of MSPs that we work with are, you know, understanding that significantly and, you know, looking to save themselves money, because the second one of their customers get hit by a ransomware attack, they're losing profitability because they have to have a tech go on site for remediation and incident response. So, yeah, I mean, I think it is industry specific, but as an MSP, I'm going to, you know, implement as many tools as possible and within the budgetary constraints of my customers in order to maintain or increase my profitability to prevent against, you know, any requirement to go and remediate.
Makes sense. And Zak, that remediation part I know falls a lot to you with Vault America. What are your thoughts on that? You're kind of that backup to the, well, you literally are the backup, but when it comes to security, I think more and more people are looking at that, it being one of the most essential parts. How are you finding your MSP partners adapting to the security or that part of the security measures?
Yeah, I think, the first line of defense, I mean, everyone needs a backup solution in place, right? Bottom line, because ransomware attacks are going to happen. More and more, there's certain things and solutions that are out there to be able to proactively detect. Obviously, prevention and antivirus and those types of solutions kind of were the baseline. Backup is the core solution, I think, just because if you don't have a backup, if you do get attacked, if some of those preventative measures don't work, different variants come out, things like that, then ultimately, you know, you need to be able to restore, right, that data from an offsite location or a local backup copy or what have you. So, you know, backup is a core solution, of course, that every single MSP partner needs to have in place. A local copy is big, offsite, obviously in the cloud is big too, but ultimately the tools that are out there that Scott offers, that Mark even offers, to be able to prevent certain things, to be able to detect certain things, pieces that actually are native within Microsoft Windows that come into play as well. Things like you know, app blocker and you know, file monitoring, things like that could be implemented and utilized as well. So all those types of things together, ultimately, again, you need to build your portfolio of solutions, right? And it's not just one. And as Scott said, depending on the budget of that end customer, you need to be able to incorporate whatever you can as an MSP for that SMB and business customer. If you can do that, then at least you've done everything possible. Whether that SMB buys it or not, it's up to them. That's where you come back to the well and say, okay, you know, you got to educate them through some of the fear and some of the stories that are out there to make it actually happen and make them realize that they need the tools that we as technology companies are providing.
The sales teams definitely have their work cut out for them as far as, you know, finding that right balance of getting the customers and prospects the information they need to make those decisions. That's not an easy thing to do. It seems easy to us, but from the SMB perspective, it's a little more challenging, I think. Ransomware is now the #1 security threat, and its growth is far outpacing breaches. I know breaches were the bigger issue a few years ago. Based on your experience, where does the SMB awareness of ransomware rank on a 10-point scale? I'm going to ask each of you this, is 0 being the most extremely poor and 9 or 10 being top-notch. Let me start with Scott.
Honestly, I think that a lot of the SMBs are aware of ransomware and the challenges that are associated with it. You see a lot of news coverage in the media and newspapers and so forth. So if I had to put it at a range of 1 to 10, I'd say maybe 7, maybe 6. And there's actually science that goes behind that number. It's not just a guess. We did a analysis, a recent study, and out of these, the people that we surveyed, 54% of all organizations were hit with a ransomware attack. And the average number of ransomware attacks was 2 per those customers. So it was pretty staggering to us. And as we look deeper into it, 77% of those customers actually had up-to-date antivirus and endpoint protection implemented. And so, yes, ransomware is definitely a threat. It is, growing. It quickly took over data breaches. But I think that when you look at malware in general, from an MSP perspective, you need to pay attention to ransomware, but there's a lot of other stuff out there like exploits. And, exploits are one of the primary mechanisms now for the delivery of ransomware and malware, especially this new polymorphic, malware that's just propagating out there where you have, bugs and applications that allow, infiltration by a entrepreneurial malware writer or a ransomware as a service purchaser to get into an organization and apply these types of, viruses and ransomware to infect machines. So yes, ransomware, you need to have the defense in depth, but I think it's also important to educate your end user customers, not just about ransomware, but all of the threats in a more holistic fashion.
Some excellent insight, by the way, Scott, especially the research. Learn new things every time we jump on these sessions, so it's great. And Mark, I'm looking for the similar ranking. Where do you think the SMB awareness is, and how can MSPs elevate that number with customers and prospects?
Well, I'm kind of happy to hear that it's kind of a 6 or 7 from Scott, because I was a little bit more pessimistic, not by much. I myself feel like it's more of like a 5 or 6. And the reason I score it that low is like Scott said, I think we see a lot of this in the news. We see it tossed around, like everybody's talking about malware and ransomware. But I unfortunately think it's a lot of times misunderstood. And that's where my feeling of that 5, 6 comes in, is you may know the word, but you don't know the meaning behind it. So you don't know how to deal with it. And whether that's the MSP, hopefully not. I think most MSPs are probably in the 7 or 8 range. Their clients and their prospects are the ones that really need to be educated about these dangers. And like Scott said, it's not just the ransomware, it's all those other exploits and all those other ways that it gets into your network and causes the havoc and causes the financial loss that a business will experience from those things.
Makes perfect sense. And Zak, looking for your ranking, obviously, but also, I'm wondering how much the size of the business comes into play there too, because if you're looking, I think, a little higher organizations that may have more structured security measures in place or even end user training, I'm sure that's probably higher elevated than, the moms and pops or the 5 or 6 employee offices. I'm sure the number skews significantly, but what about when, so I'm looking for your ranking, but also what do they know what to do when they get hit by ransomware, I guess, is the other question for you, Zak.
So I was even more pessimistic than Scott and Mark. I came in at about a 3 to 4, making a 3.5. Wow. So and I think it has to do with, us being a core, just backup and recovery company, right? That's what we focus on. So not even to an extent of business continuity. We complement a lot of business continuity solutions that are on the marketplace, right? So ours is kind of being a first line of defense, just file-based backup recovery, a local copy, offsite copy, things of that nature. When the MSPs implement our solution, they are talking about implementing our solution as a complement to an overall business continuity disaster recovery plan, which, to your point, those types of companies that can afford those types of solutions, right, might have a few more employees, right? Whereas our partners may have, 5, 6, maybe 10 or 20 or 30 or even 50 or 60 employees, but with those larger companies, they're going to put us at the endpoints, right? They might use a business continuity solution at the headquarters, for example, and then complement. So it really depends. Smaller customers will just use us solely, right? So those types of mom and pop shops, they don't really know what to do, right? They've heard of it. They don't think it's ever going to happen to us. So I think there's a lot of education that still needs to be done by the MSP to be able to communicate to those businesses, right? To be able to say, okay, yes, we need to, whether it's a free cybersecurity assessment or a lunch and learn or free product trials for backup services or endpoint protection, it's really, you really have to help those prospects understand their environment, right? And understand the vulnerability landscape. So I think there's a lot of education that still needs to be done. And that's why I'm that pessimistic, because a lot of our partners are kind of saying, we're helping them, right? We're saying, we'll do a webinar for your customers to educate them on ransomware, right? Yeah, it might not happen to you. You don't think it will, but at some point it will. So again, a 3.5, I'll stick to that. But I think at the same time, I think it's because of maybe the types of solutions that we offer, and the types of customers that will obviously implement our solutions, right? They go big and small, but that's kind of my stance.
And that I mean, Brian, I think it's a great question. Defining the SMB, we could probably talk about that for an hour or two. Soho, SMB, mid-market, SME, enterprise, where does it all fall in line? To us, it's, the 5 to 250 is small, and then 250 to 500, 250 to 1,000, somewhere in that ballpark is mid-size. On the study that we did, 2/3 of the IT managers, so if you're an SMB customer and you have an IT manager, 2/3 had no idea what anti-exploit technology was, but they understood ransomware, right? So yes, I think Soho, 1% or 1, 2, and then as you move up, S, M, and then, E or whatever, it's definitely going to fluctuate. So I think we're all in line. I think we're all probably talking the same language. I think just at what level in the 1 to 10,000 user organization, it will absolutely vary.
I think the point of the question really is to get people thinking too about that percentage that don't know, because that awareness of what it is one thing too, but how to deal with it's the second part. But from the vertical perspective too, you see like law offices and those that are under certain compliance issues like medical seem to be more understanding, because they're also being put through additional training now that they may not have had in the past. So hopefully that number will change, and we'll continue to see it. I don't think you'll ever hit to where it's 10 out of 10 on awareness scale, just because of people. I'll leave it at that point, the weak link. But
and
Mark,
just
go ahead.
I'm sorry, just to build on that, this crazy industry that we're in, I think another problem is not knowing what you don't know.
Yeah.
And that goes for both MSPs and our clients. So
well, that actually leads into my next question, which was on the education. Zak was talking about it, is we need to, as MSPs, as a channel community, figure out how to help educate the end users and the SMB in the mid-range. I mean, it's not just related to SMB. I think seeing more channel partners scaling their business into larger markets too. But what are some of the best methods for boosting client conversations on ransomware and other security concerns too? How do you get that message out?
I'll start on this. I think the conversation is going to be a little bit different whether you're talking to a prospect or a client. I'll start with the clients. If you're not doing a business review of some type, whether it's quarterly, monthly, even biannually, you're doing a disservice to yourself and to the client. That business review is a great time to be talking about those things, because at that point you have some information about what they're doing in their business, what holes that they have in their security or their network that could make these exploits and make ransomware a very real possibility. And going into those conversations with even like a one-page summary or slick that you can leave behind and say this, here's what we talked about, here's what we're concerned about, this is what I want you to learn more about, and if you have more questions, we're here to help. If you're talking to prospects, hopefully you're getting to the point of doing a network discovery or analysis or some type of discussion that's going to be a little bit more about what they actually have. Because to just talk at a very high level or in generalities, kind of going back to that fear and education, it's hard to really make it impactful for that prospect if you don't know what their situation is or you don't know what their weak spots are. So that's where I think those conversations in education can kind of open up with a prospect. It's going to be a little bit harder, but it's doable.
Right, more of a long range kind of building and hopefully encouraging. Zach, what are your thoughts as far as getting that word out to both of those audiences? What are you seeing your partners do and do particularly well to get the security conversation started?
Yeah, I think more and more that they have quarterly newsletters. They're getting better and better at sales and marketing, which traditionally, IT companies weren't that good at. So I think they're adopting a lot of the tactics and techniques out there to be able to communicate, in the right way, right? So whether it's newsletter and about new technologies, new information, real world stories, right, that relate to them. Maybe their verticals in the financial, right? And they really need to focus on, broker dealers who need to be FINRA compliant, right? Well, there's mandates there where they have to back up their data, right? And retain it for a certain amount of time. They have to have security controls in place to adhere to audits and things like that. So verticalizing it is a big thing, but really supporting the message and the education through whether it's an RSS feed, whether it's a newsletter, whether it's going in, as I mentioned before, with a lunch and learn, a free cybersecurity assessment, at a certain level, just high level initially since it's free. But really, trying to, and then leveraging the vendor resources. I think all of us have a lot of resources internally. We obviously want to push and sell our products ultimately, but also, we need to educate them and be able to say, okay, this is how to actually bring it to market, right? And then around that, every MSP should be drinking their own Kool-Aid, right? So if they're going and implementing these solutions and trying to require their customers to buy these solutions from them, so sure they can make money but do right by the customer ultimately, they need to have their own internal employees understand and educate their own internal employees, whether they're simulating phishing attacks or a data breach type scenario or whatever it might be, right? They need to have the gateway controls, the perimeter, the firewalls. They need to use what they want their customers to use. And I think ultimately, if the employees for that MSP kind of see how their company is protecting their employees, themselves, their infrastructure, their network, and it's working, right? And they can avoid attacks because they can restore data and they can prevent, certain intrusions, things like that, then ultimately the message can resonate through to that SMB and that end customer that they're trying to get as a prospect and ultimately a customer. They have as a prospect and they want to get as a customer.
Excellent suggestions. And Scott, to add on to this too, and I know you do a lot of work with Sophos internationally, do you see this being done differently in different parts of the world? And what other suggestions would you offer?
Yeah, now you're adding a fourth, dimension to the SMB question. Yeah, I do. I see. So if you look at the countries that ransomware is the worst, it's basically India, Mexico, and then the US, right? So you see a lot of different angles from MSPs globally. I spent a lot of time in London and Asia. I was just in Japan a few weeks ago meeting with MSPs. At the end of the day, and I can't believe I just said that, but at the end of the day, it's pretty much all the same from a marketing standpoint and an education standpoint. Totally agree with everything that Zak and Mark said. QBRs, lunch and learns, webinars, newsletters, etc. One thing that I think I can add in addition to that is to leverage your vendors. And, particularly when you're choosing a security vendor, on the endpoint side and just in general, when you're working with the vendors that are out there, a lot of vendors produce a significant amount of content. And, I was just looking through our partner portal in preparation for our partner conferences coming up. And, I'm just looking at a website in a box. We have campaigns that are predefined, brandable campaigns that an MSP can send out to prospective customers or their existing customers on, cryptojacking and stop the phish gamification. And, what is the anatomy of a hack, right? I mean, a lot of MSPs, want to understand, how does this happen? But then the end user customer has always said, how did this get through, right? How did this get on my desktop or how did this get into my email? And so I think a lot of those types of, actions and types of content is, incredibly important. And then also, keep an eye out for the vendors in the news. We do a lot with NBC nightly news, and we're on NBC in the morning, and we're talking about the threats of wireless. Why shouldn't you connect to a wireless hotspot at Starbucks without any security on your endpoint? And I think that's really, really important, because you have the mentality that, I'm just going to log into a non-secure wireless, access point, and I'm good. I'm not going to worry about it. I'm not really accessing any, confidential information, when in fact, once they're in your PC, they can propagate, laterally. And so I think that's incredibly important as well. So I would add, leverage your vendors.
Great. You've thrown out a lot of excellent resources. And one thing I've seen MSPs doing particularly well, I think, over the last year, is I follow a lot of them on their social media sites, Twitter, LinkedIn, as well as Facebook. I try to absorb as much as I can, and I'm seeing some that are doing a great job of taking all those resources that you mentioned, including IOTA articles, in addition to CompTIA and others that are out there that are sharing some research and relevance of that cross-section of information, sharing it and sharing amongst themselves, I think helps get the word out too. Excellent advice on that part. So,
and I just a quick addition to that.
Oh, sure.
Small challenge to MSPs. If you don't see something from vendors that you think is useful, ask. Pick up the phone, send an email, let us know, because you guys are the boots on the ground, and you can tell us what kind of content or what kind of information your clients are looking for, and that helps us produce better content that's going to be relevant to you and your clients.
Yeah, and I think as the channels evolved, especially over the last, I'd say 3 or 4 years, I'm seeing the marketing really stepping up, especially from the larger MSPs, but many of the small ones too. If they can't afford their own internal people to handle marketing, they're looking at outsource, whether it's local or working with national companies to help them with that too, and get expertise from outside. It doesn't always have to be your ideas. Use that think tank mentality of asking others of how to connect better with clients, and in particular, if you're going to grow, prospects as well. So on the flip side, what are MSPs doing to improve their own knowledge base of schemes and attacks? What type of education and training can they provide their own employees to prepare them for working with their customers? I think someone had mentioned that a few minutes ago. So not only to educate their customers, but also to keep their own systems secure, that eat your own dog food mentality. Why don't we start with Zak on this?
Yeah, so I think it is, there are MSPs that are morphing themselves into MSSPs, right? Managed Security Service Providers. They're taking courses, a lot of security certifications where it's CompTIA or events, are coming up where they're educating themselves also. Those vendor provided resources are important, of course, but ultimately, eat your own dog food, right? Like build your network, secure your network, like you want it to be secure, like you want your customers' networks to be secure. And so you can respond to attacks or ransomware, and be able to recover, right? If you need to be able to, if you can't combat it, you can't combat it, right? So you have to restore from a backup. But hopefully, ultimately, I think, there are kind of 4 things, right? You need to have preventative measures in place, you need to be able to respond if something were to happen, and have the pieces in place to be able to respond. More and more, I think MSPs are starting to find resources, and vendors out there are starting to provide proactive detection technologies and things like that. I know Scott's organization, has some very solid technologies and products out there to be able to do that. And then ultimately, you look at predictive, right? And if you can actually predict what's going to happen before it happens, that's great too. So I think along those lines, partners, MSPs are starting to kind of capture and hopefully purchase those solutions and products to build our portfolio. Ultimately, if you're able to, phishing attacks, there's a lot of reconnaissance that goes on before those attacks happen, right? They're so targeted. So ultimately, sure, the best case scenario is to be able to provide some way to monitor and catch during that recon period before those attacks even start. And so from there, I think ultimately we want to make it expensive for those attackers to basically try and attack you. And if you can do that, then hopefully those attacks will start to slow down and stop. But ultimately, things are just getting worse and worse, and with different technologies, the landscape's going to change. So whether it's a a car or what have you, that's taken over by an attack. I mean, it's going to be interesting the way things kind of evolve. But ultimately, the MSP needs to really figure out how they're going to, work with what we have today, how things are being penetrated today, and put those pieces in place.
And Scott, are you seeing your partners adopting your technologies as well as much as they should? And what are you doing to encourage that as well? I don't know if, Sophos has an outreach program that you're trying to get, more of that eat your own dog food in place, because it doesn't always happen, honestly.
Yeah, absolutely. We do. All the MSPs that we work with get NFRs of all the products that we offer. And that's really critical, because what happens is when an MSP signs up, they'll get access to a centralized dashboard we call Sophos Central. And then they can go and implement all the tools that we have. And that is critical for a variety of reasons. Zak said something that really struck a chord with me, is that you have to be more, he said proactive versus reactive, I think. And I love that. I'm going to change proactive to predictive, because what's happening now in the security space is that you have a lot of this machine learning and deep learning, and it's nebulous to a lot of MSPs and a lot of end user customers. So as the MSP becomes more educated on, what this deep learning neural network capability is around, not just endpoint security, but how that ties into all of the different security technologies that are out there, then the employees, the technicians, they all become more intelligent. And when they go out there, they can, they're your sales team, in addition to having a dedicated sales team from an MSP perspective. One other thing that we like to do internally is phishing simulation, right? So we bought a company about a year ago called Phish Threat, and we integrated that into Sophos Central. And now we do phishing simulations. And, that is, like you said before, how do you educate the weakest link within an organization? And so we saw a big spike. We had some campaigns go out that really focused on the U.S. taxes, due in, I think, 2 weeks. The IRS scams are out there. They're prolific, and nothing is 100%, right? Nothing. And I think if you can get an end user to click on an IRS scam and enter some credential called credential harvesting, they have to go through a specific training. If they click on the link, that's a different training. So now what you're doing is you're bringing a level of end user education into not only the MSP, but into your customer base to improve the overall security fabric across your customers. And again, it's all focused on increasing the MSP's profitability, or maintaining a level of profitability by implementing tools and techniques and education in order to prevent the end user from becoming their own worst enemy.
Yeah, just to add on that, I think I completely agree, obviously, on the educational piece. And I think, if there's some way to be able to include cybersecurity, some kind of policy in an employee handbook, right? And literally before somebody gets their computer, right? If you're a new employee, here, take this quick test, right? Go through this phishing simulation, or if there's a way to implement that right away, maybe that will help, right? Educating on the front end, make it some kind of a requirement, not something too difficult, but something just, walk through a scenario and a process. Maybe there's a little 6-step, process that is part of the onboarding process for a new employee. And maybe you kind of hit that hard at the beginning and prevent, the human errors and non-education, right? Or uneducated people from a bad result for the company ultimately.
It makes perfect sense. And Mark, I know, we talked about email being one of those things that every employee, if you think about MSP, their employees aren't all technical. They may have somebody who's answering the phones, reception, accounting. MSP organizations are getting broader. They've got a variety of different skills in-house. What do you see as far as like email, the adoption of security and encryption and other things? Do you think that helps an MSP as their business to better work with their clients?
I do. And, email is one of those ubiquitous technologies. I kind of hate that word, but it is what it is. We all use email to communicate in some form or fashion. And because of that, I guess, normalcy of communicating that way, we take it for granted. We take it for granted from a security standpoint. We take it for granted for what could potentially be in email from a data perspective. So having somebody that's going to understand those risks and being able to apply, the security, whether you're talking about kind of the things that everybody knows about, which is the anti-spam, anti-phishing type of technologies, to taking it a step further of archiving things for compliance or encrypting data through email communication. These are all things you have to learn about, whether you're the MSP or a client. And I think another challenge, what Scott and Zak are saying, it all makes sense. But I think the problem for a lot of MSPs and their clients is that most precious resource that we have, which is time. And all this stuff that you can learn about security, it's like drinking from a fire hose. So, you've got 3 vendors here on this call that really are experts in various areas of security. So when you're trying to educate yourself and your team as an MSP, pick something, learn that over a month or over a quarter. The other stuff, that's what we're here for. Us 3 vendors, lean on us. We're going to help you out in those areas that you don't quite feel comfortable in, and we're going to help educate you, I guess, in an on-the-job training type of manner. And that way you can really plan and focus and put the resources, the time, and the money into learning something well and moving on. Because that, I think, is going to be a little bit more predictable in terms of your operations and educating your team on security than waiting for a breach or something that blew up, and then you're losing revenue on the client that you're helping in addition to trying to learn on the job. And that goes for email or any other security technology in the network.
Right. I mentioned accountant for one reason. Is a couple of weeks ago, I was actually at a local hockey game and sat next to the accountant for one of our local MSPs. It's an in-house accountant. And he was educating me on the different tools that I could be using in my business, even though he's an accountant, based on the experience he had and the lessons he was taught in the company. Company's very proactive on their training internally, which I thought was kind of cool. But you never know who your employees will be talking to as well, not just your technical team. So if they have the right skills, obviously you don't want them selling things that are way beyond their capabilities, but at the same point, they can be advocates, especially on the security side, to say, maybe you should have this discussion with our team, or we could go in a little more in depth on, specifics, but for security, I think that's crucial. So our time is really running short at this point. What I'd like to do is kind of go around and get some final thoughts you'd like to share with our listeners. Why don't I start off with Scott?
Sure. No, this was great. I think there's a lot of additional content that we could have talked about, and in general, I mean, this could be a full day. In fact, it is a full day conference for you. But I think, overall MSPs, should absolutely, dog food their own, products that they're out there pushing and selling. If anybody is interested in anything that we have to offer, sophos.com/MSP, check it out. We've bought a lot of companies recently, and we've integrated them pretty successfully into Sophos Central, and we'll continue to do so. And, I think that, you need to look at relentless innovation, not just on the vendor side, but on the MSP side. What's next from an MSP standpoint? How, what are the best practices and techniques for, selling security services? It is very different than selling managed services in general. And I think it's a much higher value differentiated offering and service that you could put out there. And so just, leverage the vendors, work with the local teams. And, by all means, if anybody has any questions for me, they can reach out to me. My email is scott.barlow@sophos.com.
Very good. How about you, Zak?
Yeah, I think ultimately we as vendors, we want to help you increase your revenue. We want to increase our revenue, but we want to help you increase your revenue, right? It all kind of works in tandem. We want to generate more leads for you all, right? If you're growing your business, you're interested in growing your business, we're here to help, right? Let us know, and just to resonate with what Mark said earlier, let us know what you want us to do, right? We're willing to like Sophos has done it, right? They're a larger organization compared to the two of us, I think, and they have a lot of these tools and things. And so, with Vault America, I mean, we're here, we do webinars for our customers, for their end users, right? To try and generate leads and trials for our solution and the other solutions that they're offering. So again, if you want to, kind of learn more about what we can do around data backup and recovery to generate more opportunities for you all, for your customers, and help educate your customers around data protection and availability. vaultamerica.com. Let us know. Again, my email, reach out to me anytime, zkarsan@vaultamerica.com. But we're here to help, and we want to help you grow your business so we can all grow ours, and ultimately, protect our homeland and landscape, and be able to sleep at night.
Excellent. Thanks, Zak. And Mark.
Yeah, to kind of build on what Zak and Scott are saying, we as vendors, we look to the channel for that partnership. And at MailProtector, we believe that partnership is a two-way street. So we want to hear from you. We want to communicate. We want to find out about what is going on with email at the client level, because that helps us respond and provide the kind of tools that are going to secure your clients and your businesses, which hopefully in turn will help you sell your services that much better and that much easier. In today's day and age, with all these compliance and regulations, it's another piece that you have to learn, and it's more education that we've been talking about that has to be digested. So reach out to us. I mean, you have great vendors here on this call. Leverage them. Look for ways to increase your value to your client, whether that's email encryption, whether that's backup, whether that's security endpoint products. It's a whole slew of things. You don't have to be the expert. We're the experts, but you got to pick up the phone or you got to send us an email. And if you have questions about email security, about encryption, please reach out to me at MailProtector. My email address is markg@mailprotector.com, and I'd love to send some information your way.
Yeah, we could definitely go on for hours of this discussion, to Scott's point too. And the good news is it's 24 hours a day on iotsa.com. There's lots of information available. We do the security experts panel on a regular basis, as well as a live event. Our next live event is coming up in New Jersey on April 26th. So if you're in that area, we'd love to have you. Or if you want to jump on a plane, we'd still love to have you too. So lots of options, easy in and out. But with that said, I'd like to thank Zak Karsan of Vault America, Scott Barlow of Sophos, and Mark Glowacz of MailProtector for joining me on today's IOTSA Cybersecurity Experts panel. I'd like you to have a great day, and also be sure to check out iotsa.com for more great channel cybersecurity insight. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you, Brian.
Bye, Brian.